I thought this time I'd show you a little more about how I put the oil pump together. I'll show you a video in a minute that I took, but it uses used parts because one of the things I do is heat and freeze the parts so they go together a little easier. And the time it takes to try to explain, the parts start to go back to room temperature. So it's a lot easier for me to do it, I'll call it kind of offline. But when you're going through this process, the first thing you need to do is understand the depth of your oil pan. And here I've got a picture while it's installed, but before you install the pan, of course, you measure the inside from where the gasket contacts the flange down to the bottom, and mine's about 7.5 inches. This next part's a little tricky. You can do it alone, but it almost takes two pairs of hands. You need to hold the pickup tube up against the oil pump where the chamfer is, where it will get pressed in later. And then you need to measure with a straight edge across the screen and with a ruler down to the flange of the block where the oil pan contacts and get a good measurement. And if you want, you can also kind of account for the gasket thickness in your calculation. People have different ways to put these Chevy oil pumps together. This is an old set of parts. I'm just going to show you what I did and how I've done it now several times with the inexpensive tools. First of all, this tool is available from, I bought this one at Summit Racing. The challenge with this is that it operates from the side. In fact, it's even got a little bit of a bend to it if you really get a hard look at it, because you're not driving on the center. But this tool costs on the order of $20, and the high-class tools are closer to $100. I don't remember exactly, but they're pretty expensive. So my solution has been to add a hose clamp to the part. So once you start at the engine, you measure the height. You measure the height from this screen down to the main bearing web, and then you measure from the main bearing web back up to the bottom of the pan, or you measure from the pan rail, and you can take into account the gasket. You lay a straight edge across here and go down to the main rail, and that lets you, it's a little tricky because the part wants to move around a lot, but you kind of have to line it up in the pump, kind of like so, and then you make a mark, and you put a mark on the part. And one of the things I learned was you need to make sure that mark comes from the front all the way to the back, because as you start putting things together, you won't be able to see this mark, that mark anymore. You need to make sure it's marked all the way at the back. Secondly, some people like to weld or braze the pickups because they can move. I'm a little nervous about welding and brazing on castings and oil pumps and damaging them. My solution is thread locker, specific thread locker. This particular one is a Permatex brand. It's their high temperature thread locker 27200. They rate it for 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is well above any oil temperature that you'll encounter in your engine. If you get your oil that hot, you're in a lot more trouble than this. Secondly, this is rated for press fits, not just threads. They rate it for things like filler tubes that are press fit. So this is a pretty good application for that. Then you never want to put that pump in a vise because it's tight clearances and you would damage it. So a board, actually I use two boards because the pump doesn't want to lay flat. So when you come up here to do this, and the flange isn't quite level, so part of it sits on the main board, and then the rest of the pump, this is what, 1/4, 3/8 of an inch thick. It's just a good piece to stabilize the pump so it won't go anywhere. And when you get done, it doesn't rock. It's not quite vertical, but it's close. These can be pretty hard to get started. this tube's pretty large and you've got a chamfer. So when you line that pickup up and you want to drive it in, it doesn't want to start many times. So you prepare this now by putting this tool on the part, like so. In fact, you can even, on this one, you can unscrew the handle. And you get that down against the flange. Then you come back around, thread that back in. So it's like so. And then the clamp keeps, this tends to want to back out. So the clamp is kind of the poor man's way of making sure that it stays in position and stays straight. So I always just tighten that down, just snug. It doesn't, when you're not trying to keep anything from leaking, you just don't want the tool, when you're in the heat of battle, you don't want this tool coming apart. So you tighten that guy down just until it's snug, like so. Now, that tool's not going anywhere. It's right up against the flange that it has to drive in. Now then I take that entire assembly, and put it in the freezer. 0-degree freezer. That'll make this metal as small, it'll shrink it as small as it can go. And then I take that pump and put that pump in the oven. And you don't have to get it too hot, but I get it up to like 200 or so. Up to 200 degrees. That expands it a little bit. Just gives you a few thousandths more. This tube has got on the order of a 6/1000 press fit. And so if you can just expand it a couple thousandths and shrink it a couple thousandths, it helps. So then, you need some heavy gloves. And when I do it, I use 2 layers of leather gloves, and that's been enough so far at 200 degrees to keep me insulated. Just two, one inside the other. Put the small ones on, put the big ones over it. You may want to pick something better than that, but it worked for me. So then, with it hot, and I'm going to put on a pair anyway, just to protect from sharp edges while I'm showing you this. So you get it out here. You put a smear of red, a little bit inside, and a little bit on the end of the tube. You get it lined up here, and you line up your marks. Let's see if I can get it. So you want to have your marks lined up. And see, this one is already used, so it's wanting to go in already. But then you take that guy and you drive it. And my experience has been, you drive it about halfway in, and then you double check and make sure your marks are still lined up. If you haven't gone all the way in, you can tweak it just a little bit and make sure your marks are lined up. And then you set it back down on your board, and you drive that dude home. And then you let it sit. Let that Permatex, let that thread locker harden. I think Loctite's probably got one that's similar. Just happened that I was available to get the Permatex one. And then you take this guy apart. Take it off. And then I'll undo the clamp. But you end up with the lines lined up, and then you can go put it on the engine and double check and make sure that you're in, let's see, it's a 1/2 inch to 3/8 of an inch is the recommended clearance from here to the bottom of the pan. And then what Melling actually recommends is that you get a 3/8 of an inch, this isn't a 3/8, it might be, a 3/8 inch drill bit, and lay that drill bit right up here on the filter, install this to the engine, or I said filter it to the pickup, tape that to the pickup, and put a little grease on it, bolt this to the engine, put your oil pan on top, and make sure that you've got clearance between here and the bottom of the pan when you set the pan down on it, so that it isn't tighter than that. If you get a witness mark from the grease, you're probably too tight. And to my comments about people that want to weld this or braze it, I don't have a problem. If you want to do it, go for it. It makes me a little nervous. I will tell you is that I've put a breaker bar in one of these with the thread locker in and put a scale on it out at the end and pulled it. In other words, twisted this. And in order to break that thread locker loose and the press fit, I had to put over 35 pounds out at the end of my breaker bar. It was over 35 foot-pounds, and that's a pretty doggone tough, that makes a pretty doggone tough joint, and it's not likely to go anywhere by vibration, at least on a street engine. If you're going racing, hey, there might be some different ways to go at it, but that's my solution. With inexpensive tool, and I've done several of these now, and works pretty well. Just once you get one of these driven in, you can't ever use it again. You can't take it apart, put it back together, and put it in an engine. You need to get a new pickup because it does crush and it loses press fit. So once it's driven in, it's done. On my first engine, I messed that up, and on my first build for this Camaro, and I ended up with the pickup too far off the bottom of the pan because my marks weren't as visible as they should have been, and I had to take it apart and go buy a new pickup and do it a second time. The engine's just about ready for the oil pan and the front cover to be installed. I got the oil filter adapter on. The gaskets are just laying there. I'm going to put a little sealer on them first. But the pump is now installed with the screen, and I installed the screen with a red thread locker, high temperature, so that it should stay put. The actual clearance to the bottom of the pan, milling once between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 an inch. I was able to get it. It's maybe just a touch over 1/2 an inch, but it's very close to 1/2 inch. Would have liked it to be a little closer to the bottom of the pan, but when you're driving it in, it ends up where it ends up. So everything's good there. Got the oil pump drive shaft installed. That's got to go on before you put the pan on. That little plastic driver latch there, you can see it won't go through the hole. So if you put the pan on and don't roll it, roll the engine over and then try to install that, you have to pull the pan back off again. So that's in good shape. I say I've got the front cover ready to go back on. Cover's flattened out. It's got a new. I put a new front seal in it and cleaned it up. I mean, the old front seal had only been in there a couple hours. It was probably good, but since it had coolant on it and so forth, I just said take it out and let's go ahead and do it all correct. The bottom of the side of the engine's now all dressed, got the brackets on, the flywheel or flex plate, oil pan. The balancer's just sitting there, it isn't bolted down yet. That'll be kind of the next job. But at this stage, I got everything, I think, pretty well buttoned down. Starter's on, knock sensor. So everything's pretty good on the bottom side. I'm going to roll it over and work on the balancer and the water pump and the exhaust manifolds. But going so far, so good.